At my direction, the United States conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. We're going to run the country until such time. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. Take a look. We're watching it very closely. If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
Au président délirant et arrogant des États-Unis, je dis ceci. Trump, le joueur compulsif, nous sommes ton adversaire. Nous attendons, nous sommes prêts à vous affronter. Venez voir comment tous vos atouts dans la région seront détruits. Venez voir ce qu'il arrivera aux bases, aux navires et aux forces américaines.
China will never allow the United States to launch a war against China, conventional or nuclear, without suffering devastating consequences.
What I'll do is if they feel like Costco, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join. But
Ils nous imposent des droits de douane, ils auront des droits de douane. Ils nous imposent une coercition, ils auront des dispositions.
He's good at exploiting weaknesses, but he backs down when he's punched in the face.
What planet are we living on now? A president who decides on his own without consulting anyone, without a mandate, with an impressive military arsenal to bomb a sovereign country and kidnap his counterpart.
And early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history. And if you think about it, we've done some other good ones like the attack on Soleimani.
Just like that, a historic act. And without shame, he boasts about the action. He proudly claims his kidnapping.
The only people with lights were the people that had candles. Sort of got him a little by surprise.
On a donc enlevé Nicolas Maduro et son épouse. Pourquoi son épouse? Par-dessus le marché.
We engaged in a law enforcement action. We had a legitimate indictment for Maduro for narco-terrorism, for weapons smuggling and weapons trafficking. I think he's going to go away. He's going to be found guilty. That's not a kidnapping. That's a law enforcement operation.
How can we understand this attitude? How should we interpret such an act, so coldly and arrogantly executed and claimed? Without being alarmist, we must recognize that the world has entered a new era with this kidnapping of President Nicolas Maduro, yet another provocation from the White House. One where everything can truly tip over, where each day we get a little closer to complete chaos. I dare not say the apocalypse.
He was trying to get to a safe place, which wasn't safe because we would have had the door blown up in about 47 seconds, they say on average, regardless of how thick the steel was. It was a very thick door. It was a very heavy door, but he made it to the door. He was unable to close it.
If you want to have war, you will get war. If you want to destroy China, you will be destroyed. If you want to impose nuclear war on China, you will be wiped out by nuclear war. This is very serious. China's policy is very clear. China will not fire the first shot, but China will not allow you to fire the second shot. No country in China's neighborhood is a match against China in terms of military power. China's military buildup is a matchup against only one country, that is the United States. China will never allow the United States to launch a war against China, conventional or nuclear, without suffering devastating consequences. If you have not watched the Victory Day parade in Beijing on September the 3rd, one of the weapons China demonstrated is, we call it 61, because it can contain 60 nuclear warheads plus one hydrogen bomb. Now, in the world of today, let me tell you, which country has hydrogen bomb? China is the only country with hydrogen bomb. And that ICBM can cover every corner of the world in less than 20 minutes. and destroy any target in any corner of the world without any possibility of being intercepted. I hope Washington has learned the lesson.
The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of of Ukraine. Iraq, too. Anyway, 75.
It's true that age can sometimes tear the truth from us against our will, a revealing slip of the tongue. But what the former American president was denouncing at another time, while speaking of Ukraine, before his tongue slipped and referred to his own actions in Iraq, applies perfectly to what President Donald Trump has just done in Venezuela, only it's even more serious. Taking the decision alone to remove a head of state, claiming this time that he's involved in drug trafficking, that he's a narco-trafficker.
C'est une fois de plus le pétrole qui est la cause réelle de cette intervention. La lutte contre le narcotrafic n'étant qu'un prétexte.
Donald Trump vient de mettre la main sur la plus grosse station d'essence du monde.
Quand ils l'ont arrêté, ils ont dit dans les médias qu'il est soupçonné d'être dans la drogue et le terrorisme. C'est comme si demain les flics ils viennent chez toi, ils toquent à ta porte, ils te disent on t'arrête, tu leur dis pourquoi, ils te disent on verra au commissariat. On va voir quel procès on va te coller.
The drug trafficking argument is absolutely not new. It has very often served Washington to arrest a head of state and install one of their own to control the country. Yes, it's not the first time that the United States of America has decided unilaterally to kidnap a head of state for reasons of, they say, narco-trafficking. Back in December 1989, the American army invaded Panama to capture Manuel Antonio Noriega Moreno. A former CIA informant, he became the country's strongman in 1983, then an ally deemed to be a burden. The operation, named Just Cause, mobilized nearly 27,000 American soldiers, including 13,000 already stationed in the Canal Zone. Officially, it resulted in 500 deaths. NGOs, for their part, speak of several thousand civilian victims. After a 2-week manhunt and the failure of multiple capture attempts, Noriega finally took refuge in haste on December 24, 1989, in the Vatican Embassy in Panama City, a place diplomatically inviolable for the American armed forces. That's when a siege of an unprecedented kind began. Unable to storm the premises, Washington invented a psychological war where music was used as a weapon. On the orders of General Maxwell, known as Mad Max, Thurman, commander of the Southern Command, powerful speakers were placed all around the embassy. The name of this operation was Nifty Package. The goal was simple: to create a kind of continuous musical barrier, played at full volume, day and night, to force the Panamanian head of state out. The system was tuned to the Southern Command Network, the American military radio in Central America. At first, without knowing the command's intentions, the station broadcast Christmas carols, since it was, as a reminder, December 24th, 1989. 3 days later, on December 27th, the nature of the operation was revealed to the station's programmers. Requests from soldiers came pouring in. The playlist switches to rock and heavy metal tracks, whose titles leave little room for the intentions of the American soldiers. Faced with this auditory assault, the Vatican protests to the authorities in Washington. At the White House, the unease grows. No one had authorized this type of musical siege. After 3 days of continuous noise, the music is stopped. But the damage is done. Isolated, sleep-deprived, subjected to constant psychological pressure and worked on by the Apostolic Nunciature and a bishop sent from Rome, Noriega finally gives in. On January 3, 1990, he surrenders to American forces. Under arrest, Manuel Noriega is exfiltrated to Miami. Before a federal court in Florida, he is sentenced to 40 years in prison for drug trafficking and money laundering. Sentence reduced by half for good behavior. Until his death in 2017, at the age of 83, the former president would be held successively in the United States, France, and then Panama, where he was also convicted for the forced disappearance of opponents during his 6-year reign in Panama.
Invadieron Irak con la excusa de que había armas de destrucción masiva. No las hay, no las hubo, pero igual Igual, ahorcaron al presidente, sin juicio ni nada. Fidel me dijo un día, Chávez, si a ti o a mí nos pasa eso, que nos invadan, dijo, lo último que podemos hacer es hacer lo que hizo Saddam, meterse en un hueco por allá. Hay que morir peleando, Chávez, ahí en la primera línea de batalla.
وخلاص لقانا الامريكان يجاوبونا على السؤال اللي حاير، لماذا العراق؟ شو السبب له؟ فيها أسلحة دمار شامل عند العراق ما عندها، كيف يصير حرب يشنط؟ ورئيس دولة عربية عضو بالجامعة العربية، ممكن الدور جاي عليكم كلكم.
Former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez, who led Honduras from January 2014 to 2022, was also arrested by the United States in February 2022, shortly after his resignation. He was then extradited to the United States for corruption and drug trafficking. He was immediately arrested and expelled, then convicted by a New York court for conspiracy to smuggle cocaine into the United States and possession of illegal firearms. Coincidence of timing, perhaps? Donald Trump, who arrests Maduro this January 3rd, 2026, after a strange decision a few weeks earlier.
Il a gracié l'ancien président du Honduras, accusé pour plusieurs dizaines d'années de prison de narcotrafic, le président Hernandez. Donc, manifestement, il y a d'autres arguments.
In truth, Washington is accustomed to this type of plot when it wants to overthrow a regime that is not favorable to it or that represents a hindrance to its interests. The drug trafficking argument is convenient, but the plot against the Maduro regime was not the first in Venezuela. His fiery predecessor, Hugo Chavez, experienced it throughout his presidency.
No es. Yo tengo varios alertas que me llegan incluso desde algunos espacios que no son realmente aliados, sino gente seria, preocupada, de la operación que está en marcha, diseñada en el Pentágono para señalarme a mí. Esto viene aproximándose, y es una operación de varios años. Hace varios años me lo dijo alguien, me dijo, te van a terminar acusando a ti de narcotraficante, a ti, directamente, a ti, Chávez. No es que el gobierno apoya o que se permita, no. Te van a tratar de aplicar la fórmula Noriega. Es uno de los planes que en Estados Unidos se ha venido desarrollando. Están buscando la manera de que se asocie a Chávez directamente con el narcotráfico. Y luego cualquier cosa es válida contra un narcotraficante que es presidente, pues. Un viaje a cualquier país del mundo y llegó un comando y se lo llevó. No, se trata de Estados Unidos, no.
The scenario had been well planned for a long time. But this time, they did not bother waiting for a trip abroad. They made a show of force by coming directly to the scene, with a full military arsenal to get his successor, Nicolas Maduro, using the same arguments, drug trafficking. Even if in the process the real reason for his abduction was revealed as a challenge, a message to the whole world, oil.
We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago. A lot of money is coming out of the ground. We're going to get reimbursed for all of that. We're going to get reimbursed for everything that we spend.
Jesse, first of all, what it means is we're going to be able to control the incredible natural resources of Venezuela, which is good for America in a few ways. Number one, it allows us to put leverage on our enemies. Number two, it makes sure that if Americans need high quality, low cost power, we're always going to have access to it. And then the third thing is it does demonstrate American military excellence, which makes people afraid to cross us in the future.
Il a mis la main sur le pétrole du Venezuela. On sait que le pétrole du Venezuela, notamment, il allait où? Il allait en Chine.
We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
Things are clearly established, aren't they?
Pour la première fois, il n'y a aucun souci d'habillage politique de la part du président américain. Il est dit très clairement et de façon très cynique que l'objectif, c'est le pétrole, prendre les ressources, extraire les ressources, ce qui nous ramène à la doctrine Trump, si on peut appeler ça doctrine, de l'illimitisme, de l'extractivisme.
So it wasn't a matter of putting an end to the fierce dictatorship.
Zelensky et Maduro, c'est à peu près le même genre d'individu. Parce que si vous cherchez un gars qui a fait du trafic d'armes, du trafic de drogue, qui a pas élu et qui a fait tuer des tas de gens, Zelensky pourrait se faire enlever par les troupes d'élite américaines et être jugé. Il a piqué je sais pas combien de dizaines de milliards de dollars. Mais je veux dire, si vous cherchez un gars qui a pas été élu depuis ça fait 1 an et demi qu'il est au pouvoir alors qu'il est plus élu, voilà, c'est un type qui est pas élu et qui est un peu douteux.
The argument of restoring democracy, which some have used in certain media to justify this action, falls apart on its own and absolutely deserves a little historical reminder in passing. The Western narrative, almost always biased, has finally taken hold in the minds of the majority. Nicolas Maduro is said to be an inveterate dictator who has brought his country to its knees. That's debatable. I tend to think that those who brought Venezuela to its knees are the United States of America. And why? This country was ruled for 80 years by the United States. At that time, oil was flowing freely. But all the profits went to the United States. Not a single dollar in the Venezuelan state coffers. And remember, 80% of the population live below the poverty line in one of the most potentially wealthy countries in the world. 2 out of 3 Venezuelans had never seen a doctor. It wasn't until Hugo Chavez came to power who reclaimed the oil money to make it available to the population.
¿Y saben otra cosa? ¡Bastantes cojones hay aquí!
We successfully reduced the overall poverty rate, bringing it down from 70 to 7%. These were incredible social advances.
1.5 million people in 2 years were made literate. Free meals for all students and scholarships for poor women to go to university. Chavez opened free medical centers everywhere in poor neighborhoods, villages, and all the most remote corners of the country. He becomes the designated successor.
Vous devez élire Nicolas Maduro en tant que président.
Hugo Chavez steps down, calling for people to vote for Maduro. He would pass away sometime later.
Je vais continuer sa tâche, qui est de protéger les pauvres, la patrie, l'indépendance et la démocratie. Continuer le socialisme pour le futur de ce peuple.
And Maduro has only continued this policy while Machado, whom they want to put in power today, and who belongs to the families who transferred all their fortunes in the United States, benefited from US funding to try to overthrow the Chavez regime and then Maduro.
Nous constatons avec préoccupation la tentative de présenter devant ce Conseil de sécurité, comme prétendue représentante de la société civile, une personne dont la carrière publique a été marquée par un financement constant de gouvernements étrangers et de sociétés transnationales. Les preuves sont là, accessibles à quiconque souhaite les consulter, et s'étendent sur plusieurs années. Il s'agit également de sa participation à des processus de déstabilisation politique et à la promotion de l'effondrement des institutions dans son propre pays. L'instrumentalisation de telles personnalités pour légitimer des discours conflictuels, justifier le recours à la force ou minimiser les violations du droit international ne sert ni les objectifs de ce Conseil, ni le renforcement du multilatéralisme.
History is stubborn, and no matter the strength of a narrative imposed by the strongest, the loudest, it eventually finds a small window to make itself known and restore the light. In Venezuela, the Americans have no standing to speak of good governance, no.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So,
nuestra integridad territorial que ha sido salvajemente atacado en la madrugada del día de hoy. Vamos a ser esclavos. Es que jamás volveremos a ser colonia de ningún imperio del tinte que sea.
She really doesn't have a choice. We're going to have this done right.
If there was still anyone who doubted Washington's intentions, after this exchange, things are clear, right? It's clearly being said to the vice president that she is ultimately just Washington's sub-prefect. The United States will manage the transition and organize the elections. Period.
Là où il faut prendre la mesure de ce qui se passe, mépris du droit international, atteinte à la souveraineté du Venezuela.
Aucun prétexte n'autorise une nation à envahir son voisin, et encore moins s'il prétend le faire pour y régler les problèmes qui s'y trouvent. Les problèmes et leurs solutions appartiennent au peuple, qui dans chaque pays en est le seul maître.
Nous sommes en fait dans un retour loi de la jungle. C'est l'époque de, c'est l'époque de Hobbes, quoi.
C'est quoi? C'est que personne n'a réagi dans le monde. Genre, c'est comme si c'était normal.
It's precisely the silence of the international community, of the traditional ayatollahs of international law, that is deafening. In 2026, we decide to recolonize a country, and no one flinches. Some are even applauding.
Emmanuel Macron nous fait honte. Ni condamnation, ni mention de l'agresseur. Jusqu'où le président abaissera-t-il la France? Pourquoi s'est-il couché devant Donald Trump?
Comment cette réaction du président français, comment vous la qualifiez?
Aveugle.
Aveugle?
Inconsciente des réalités. Irresponsable en ce qui concerne l'avenir de notre pays et l'avenir de l'Europe.
La France prend acte de ces violations de plus en plus nombreuses des principes du droit international. Le respect des frontières, le respect du droit des peuples à disposer d'eux-mêmes. Elle continuera à plaider pour ces principes parce que ce sont les seuls qui peuvent garantir la paix et la stabilité à long terme. Mais la France se prépare pour un monde durci, pour un monde brutalisé, pour pouvoir se défendre.
Comme il est dommage de voir que la France ne s'exprime pas, que le président de la République française délègue à son piteux ministre des Affaires étrangères des propos confus qui ne désignent ni les responsables ni les coupables, ni disent qu'il faut soutenir.
La Russie viole le droit international, on dit 19 paquets de sanctions. Enfin, Donald Trump viole le droit international, Monsieur Prévost va faire beau sourire, serrer la pince en disant nous sommes des bons partenaires. Des bons partenaires dans quoi? Dans la guerre, vous, Monsieur Prévost, devez condamner les États-Unis et vous n'osez pas. Pourquoi est-ce que l'Europe n'a pas condamné ce qu'il fait au Venezuela? Pourquoi est-ce qu'on n'a pas osé condamner quand il a illégalement attaqué l'Iran en 2025? Dites tous, ah c'est un businessman. Non, c'est un impérialiste. Et deuxièmement, quand vous êtes face à quelqu'un comme ça, haussez la voix.
On peut vouloir être la grenouille qui se prend pour le bœuf. Et les Européens ont ce chic pour le moment, mais nous ne sommes pas le bœuf.
Et j'ai pas compris très bien la métaphore entre bœuf et grenouille, mais je suis sûr que si on est plein de grenouilles à se mettre ensemble, on arrive à abattre un bœuf.
Pourquoi cet abaissement devant l'Empire? Pourquoi cette servilité européenne qui, une nouvelle fois, s'est manifestée par la bouche de la commissaire européenne aux affaires étrangères?
Siyasi meşruiyeti ve uluslararası hukuku ihlal eden hiçbir eylemi tasvip etmeyiz. Venezuela meselesinde de hem Türkiye için hem dost Venezuela halkı için en iyisi, en doğrusu neyse onu yapmanın gayretindeyiz. Sayın Maduro ve Venezuela halkı milletimizin dostu olduğunu pek çok kez
Maduro y su esposa, así como en la pérdida de vidas humanas. México reafirma un principio que no es nuevo y que no admite ambigüedades.
Le président d'un pays et son épouse ont été enlevés. Il n'y a pas lieu d'être fier, c'est un acte illégal.
¡Abajo el imperialismo! La violación de la soberanía de una nación que es símbolo de independencia, dignidad y solidaridad. Y un ataque inaceptable al derecho internacional.
The tone is firm, but the impact is almost zero. It must be said that this action by Trump basically suits a few, even if they won't admit it. It serves to legitimize the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, to whom we can no longer fully oppose international law because it's dead, international law, and it can quietly occupy the Ukrainian territories it holds. After all, it's also a matter of national security for him.
Responsable chinois, je me dirais que pour Taïwan, c'est une affaire de calendrier maintenant.
The abduction of Nicolas Maduro and Venezuela's colonization benefit Beijing, giving China more reason to defend its borders from the US. It's an unexpected green light that should embolden it to take Taiwan without hesitation. What argument could be used against it now? France, for its part, is in a particularly delicate position regarding this kidnapping by Maduro. Beyond Emmanuel Macron's lapdog attitude toward Donald Trump, who misses no chance to mock him, she's poorly positioned to denounce a practice that was her own for so long. And that still sticks to her.
Lorsque nous étions une grande puissance, il y a 20, 30, 40 ans encore, lorsque nous avions un empire, un précaré, comme les Américains, on disait à l'époque, les Américains, ils contrôlent l'Amérique centrale, l'Amérique du Sud. Nous contrôlions quand même un immense territoire qui s'appelait l'Afrique.
Tout à fait.
Il y avait 25 pays qui étaient... Et chaque fois qu'un des dirigeants
d'un de ces pays nous gênait pour une raison, ou pour des raisons économiques, ou pour des raisons politiques, chaque fois que ce qu'on faisait, on faisait un petit coup d'État militaire et on envoyait le chef d'État en prison et on en mettait un autre. Ça, c'était l'époque où la France était un empire. Aujourd'hui, on va se mettre à reprocher aux autres empires, aux empires 50 ans après, de faire la même chose. C'est pour ça que je trouve, quand on attaque Trump sur cette façon de procéder, il faudrait quand même relire l'histoire contemporaine.
And yes, just a few days ago, President Macron, before his ambassadors, expressed his wish, legitimate after all, to set out again to conquer this Africa with more aggressive French companies.
Il y a 15 ans, nous étions une puissance bancaire et financière en Afrique. Tout le monde a vendu. La faute à qui, à quoi? Les régulations, nous dit-on, très bien, c'est qu'elles sont idiotes. Parce que la vérité, c'est que c'est repris par d'autres. Et il y a une pusillanimité de beaucoup qui n'est plus compréhensible. Et donc, j'ai demandé là-dessus au ministre de vraiment revoir les choses en profondeur. Et au fond, amenons des groupes français de plus en plus nombreux en Afrique, mais amenons ceux qui ont faim. Ceux qui ne se comportent pas bien et ceux qui n'ont pas faim, il ne faut plus les emmener. Par contre, il y en a beaucoup, des PME, des startups, des ETI, qui ont envie de bien travailler de manière respectueuse dans cet esprit de partenariat. Il faut y aller à fond.
This return to Africa, I'm convinced, won't be easy given the past and the approach. Paris still has a lot of trouble understanding the new generation of Africans, more open to the world and less inclined to be stepped on, to have concepts dictated to them. Especially when it sees the fate reserved for its diaspora in Europe and in the world's major nations, where they serve as scapegoats in this period of economic crisis. And then this refusal to acknowledge its colonial past with its violence in Africa.
Quand on interroge Édouard Philippe sur est-ce qu'il y a des crimes de la décolonisation, non. À partir de ce moment-là, je vais vous dire voilà, si on sait plus qui on est et si on sait pas ce qu'on a fait, voilà, c'est comme ça qu'on a perdu l'Afrique. Le 21e siècle, à partir de 2050 et du troisième tiers, sera africain. Et on n'a pas compris que dans le contrepoids à l'évolution géopolitique du monde, le sud global, c'est le point qui permet à l'Europe de jouer son rôle de pivot et d'équilibre.
But what could have driven Donald Trump on January 3rd, 2026, to remove a president of the republic and take control of Venezuela in defiance of the sacred international law that governs the world?
Moi, je ne suis pas de ceux qui pensent que Donald Trump est entouré d'une bande d'écervelés qui savent pas ce qu'ils font. Non. Donald Trump, et ceux qui l'entourent, qui sont du reste les héritiers de la Heritage Foundation.
On voit très bien les Européens se dire, mais ne faisons pas attention, il est un peu bizarre, il est un peu marginal, mais vous allez voir, on va le calmer. C'est la stratégie de ceux qui se croient plus malins que lui. Marc Rutte, je suis plus malin que lui, je vais le flatter. C'est la stratégie de tous ceux qui traitent Donald Trump en bourgeois gentilhomme, en mamamouchi. Mais Donald Trump est entouré d'un certain nombre de gens. Il a une détermination, il a une stratégie. Il faut prendre Donald Trump au sérieux et il faut prendre ce qu'il dit à la lettre, même si dans ce qu'il dit, il y a beaucoup de choses qui sont dites en l'air.
Souvent, on a tendance à le voir dans Trump une sorte de bouffon aux déclarations un peu foutraques. Bien non, il y a là derrière une vision cohérente. Trump sait où il veut aller et il y va. Et il y va notamment aux dépens de l'Europe, mais est-ce que c'est tellement nouveau?
At Europe's expense, but above all, for the interests of Americans. It's true, the whole world should stop seeing this president as a madman manipulated by extremist gurus or a dangerous arsonist. It's much more serious than that. He has an ideology. He's ready to trample on anything to make America great again. To fully understand the coherent, cold, violent, and determined logic underlying Donald Trump's actions, we must look back at history. To understand the strategy, we must take the time and have the patience to go back to the post-World War II era, when the victors, the Allies, reorganized and restructured the world and rebuilt countries devastated by the global conflict. We must go back to the Bretton Woods agreements.
July 22nd, 1944. After 3 weeks of negotiations, delegates from 44 nations sign a new international monetary system. The Bretton Woods Agreements, named after this town in the American East where the discussions took place. The goal, never relive the crisis of 29, and above all, propose a new economic framework to foster reconstruction after the Second World War. The prime position goes to the United States, and for good reason. As Europe's leading supplier and lender, they hold 80% of the gold reserves. That's why the Bretton Woods agreements mark the end of the gold standard in favor of a system based on the dollar. In short, all currencies are defined in dollars, and only the dollar itself is linked to gold. And to control this system, the International Monetary Fund is created. Its role to monitor economic policies and assist the 40 member states through a common reserve fund. The Bretton Woods Agreement will serve as the framework for the post-war boom, 30 years of growth, until the United States started running the printing press. Since then, the global economic system has become even more sensitive to economic fluctuations. That is why Bretton Woods remains a key reference point.
At the end of Bretton Woods, it was established that the US dollar would be the currency for international transactions. And the two institutions created during that meeting, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, which would grant loans in dollars to countries facing economic problems after the end of the war. These Bretton Woods agreements established a gold exchange standard system, making the dollar an international reserve currency, the only one convertible into gold. In the system of exchange rate parities, the dollar thus de facto plays a role comparable to that of gold. The dollar immediately established itself as the international unit of account to the great economic and political benefit of the United States. It is from these agreements that the United States, which at that time held the largest gold reserve, would take advantage to build itself up and widen the gap. They are the ones with the printing press. Their currency is the reference currency. For any international transaction, you have to go through it. Nothing you can do. The dollar is indispensable all over the world. They would obviously abuse it, no longer even referring to the gold reserve they possessed. The printing press would run at full speed to finance the American economy, to such an extent that in 1971, faced with an overly strong US dollar, foreign countries began to doubt the dollar's convertibility into gold. On top of that, the United States would fire up the printing press to finance the Vietnam War, which further worsened inflation and eroded confidence in the dollar. So speculators began selling dollars and buying gold, which of course put pressure on American gold reserves. Basically, it revealed that they had printed more bills than they had gold reserves. Faced with all these breaches of the Bretton Woods principle, General de Gaulle, who led France at that time, refused to support the dollar and began exchanging his currency for gold directly, without going through the dollar anymore.
Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles, Messieurs, bonjour. Le dollar flotte, c'est la nouvelle de la journée et à partir d'aujourd'hui, il est impossible de changer des devises américaines contre de l'or. C'est un discours quasiment historique qu'a prononcé hier soir le président Nixon, puisqu'en fait, il a remis en cause tout le système monétaire international mis en place au lendemain de la dernière guerre. Cela veut dire que le dollar est à partir d'aujourd'hui pratiquement comme le marque, c'est-à-dire qu'il flotte. Le cours du dollar va varier en fonction de l'offre et de la demande.
Le plus spectaculaire, c'est bien sûr l'embargo sur l'or. Bretton Woods, c'est fini. Le système monétaire international mis en place à la fin de la Deuxième Guerre est mort. L'étalon de change or n'existe plus. Le dollar n'est plus convertible.
President Nixon thus decided in August 1971 to suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold, marking the end of the Bretton Woods system, but not its institutions, and not the dollar's hegemony. The United States had an ace up their sleeve. They reached agreements much earlier with Saudi Arabia, then with OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Producers, so that oil would be priced in dollars. In exchange, the United States committed to guaranteeing the military security and stability of these states. This was the birth of the petrodollar, a system that allows the United States first to have a strong permanent demand for dollars, then to borrow at a lower cost, to finance their deficit more easily, and of course to exert a strong geopolitical influence. All this shows how important the power of the dollar is for the USA economy. However, and this is why the intervention in Venezuela makes perfect sense, if gold remains a safe haven, much like having universal insurance for your assets, oil, on the other hand, is the engine of our modern world. Without it, no cars, no planes, and many factories would come to a standstill. Its price has a direct impact on almost everything we consume, from transport to the manufacturing of everyday objects. When the price of oil goes up, everything gets more expensive and it can slow down the economy. Conversely, when it falls, it can give things a boost. Its value is therefore closely linked to global economic growth and industrial demand. Geopolitical tensions in oil-producing regions can also cause prices to skyrocket as supply can easily be disrupted. It's essentially the lifeblood of economic warfare. That's why it's so important to take control of it.
تسيطروا على العالم ككل فعليكم أن تسيطروا على النفط. مستلزمات السيطرة على النفط هو تدمير العراق.
La diferencia está en que el gobierno de este país, de Estados Unidos, no quiere la paz. Quiere imponernos su modelo de explotación y de saqueo y su hegemonía a punta de guerra.
To understand properly, we have to ask the right questions. What if tomorrow oil was no longer sold in dollars? What would happen then? It would be a major shift in the global economic order. But not an instant collapse, no. Today, every country needs dollars to buy oil. If oil were sold in euros, UN, or local currency, it follows that global demand for dollars would drop and the dollar would lose value. Washington would consequently have a harder time financing its deficit. And almost inevitably, American interest rates would rise. At the same time, the United States would lose a good portion of its privileges. In short, oil priced in dollars supports American economic power, which explains their wariness and tensions toward oil-producing countries. Anyone who steps out of line, who dares to play with the dollar and oil, usually pays for it with their life. Saddam Hussein, who had the idea in 2002 to say he'd stop selling his oil only in dollars, but in euros, ended up at the end of a rope. When in February 2003, Iraq sold over 3 billion barrels of oil for 260 billion euros, the retaliation was immediate. A month later, the Americans invaded Iraq. This isn't an isolated case. In 2000, the president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, announced he would sell his oil in euros rather than dollars. A coup was staged to overthrow him, which the American administration, and specifically President George W. Bush, would later admit to having financed and supported. The coup failed, but its consequences completely paralyzed the country.
It's a Yankee. La nación más agresora en la historia de la humanidad. Se atrevieron a lanzar bombas atómicas sobre ciudades indefensas. Allí están Hiroshima y Nagasaki. ¿Qué cosa es esa? Han invadido Panamá, bombardearon y mataron a miles, quemaron un barrio entero para llevarse a Noriega, acusándolo de narcotraficante. Y allá está preso el que era presidente de Panamá.
Closer to home, in Africa, the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi also paid the price for his plan to replace the dollar with the gold dinar on the continent. Everyone knows how it ended, his lynching and assassination on October 20th, 2011. A declassified email published by WikiLeaks between former US Secretary Hillary Clinton and her advisor Blumenthal confirmed that the American and French governments were fully involved in a conspiracy against the Libyan leader and his currency, the dinar. With Donald Trump, they must move fast and hard to first stop this erosion of the dollar. He has to keep them in check because the competitors are moving fast and hard. On the other side, China and India within the BRICS are organizing. They are organizing to buy the oil needed for their industry in currencies other than the dollar. The BRICS represent about 45% of the world's population, a significant share of oil, gas, and strategic minerals, and even the bulk of industrial production. The United States cannot therefore ignore a bloc capable of setting standards, influencing prices, and impacting supply chains. American sanctions work because transactions go through the dollar and their banks. They go through the US system. If the BRICS trade among themselves using their own financial system without the dollar, sanctions become less effective, which is a direct threat to the number one geopolitical tool of the United States of America. Its weapon of pressure, sanctions. Oil is taking on even more vital importance in the climate of competition with countries like China and more broadly, the birth of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Due to international sanctions against Russia, the country is using local currencies for its exports of oil and petroleum products. This allows countries like India, China, Brazil, Thailand, and Indonesia to buy oil at lower prices and pay with their own currency.
China supports Middle Eastern countries in adhering to strategic autonomy, strengthening unity and cooperation, ridding themselves of external interference, and truly taking charge of the future and destiny of the Middle East.
Since 2012, China has been buying its oil from Iran in yuan, a deal that has led to Iran being blamed for all evils by every U.S. administration.
Take a look. We're watching it very closely. If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
More seriously, Saudi Arabia, a key U.S. ally, is considering selling its oil to China in yuan. It should be noted that China is its main customer. Discussions, specifically regarding payment in yuan, are currently underway. A prospect that obviously frustrates Donald Trump to the highest degree. The adversary that must be suffocated is China.
Eh bien, le monde, me semble-t-il, auquel il se prépare, c'est un monde dans lequel il va y avoir une confrontation massive, un choc frontal entre les États-Unis et la Chine. Et je crois qu'il faut avoir en permanence ça en tête.
Quand on regarde ce qu'il fait, à la fois au Venezuela, à la fois au Groenland, à la fois en Iran, en fait, il cherche à bloquer les Chinois et sans doute les Russes. Tout le pétrole vénézuélien sur lequel les Chinois avaient un regard, hop, ça va être américain. Ce qui se passe au Groenland, les terres rares, le pétrole qui peut exister ou le gaz, ça sera américain. Ce qui se passe en Iran, ça sera américain, ça sera plus chinois. Donc il y a une vraie tentative d'assèchement des capacités chinoises. C'est ça qu'il vise. Ce qui se passe en Ukraine, en fait, il s'en fiche un peu.
La Russie, il a mis des sanctions. Le Venezuela, il a mis la main dessus. L'Iran, ça risque de bientôt tomber. Et on voit qu'il y a une espèce de troc qui est en train de se préparer. Pétrole contre terres rares, oui. Tout ce qui se passe aujourd'hui, entre autres, pas que évidemment Darius Rajman, mais entre autres, doit se lire désormais à l'aune de la préparation de ce choc frontal entre les États-Unis et la Chine.
This is in our neighborhood. This is not Iraq. This is not 7,000 miles away. This is in our neighborhood. If we cannot follow the basic principle, which has been a cornerstone of American foreign policy for 200 years, that we control our neighborhood, a lot of bad people are going to take advantage of it. What the President of the United States said is, in our neighborhood, the United States calls the shots. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it is again under the President's leadership.
Beyond the fact that he decided to become an observer member of BRICS, an organization in which he remains a fundamental element due to Venezuela's wealth, Nicolas Maduro is also paying, among other things, for his decision to sell his oil to China. Under the impact of American sanctions, Venezuela announced it would sell its oil and other exports in currencies like the Chinese yuan, the Japanese yen, the Russian ruble, and the Indian rupee. Unacceptable for Donald Trump.
We tell the regime, you're allowed to sell the oil so long as you serve America's national interest. You're not allowed to sell it if you can't serve America's national interest.
The message couldn't be any clearer, right? You're my neighbor. You're in my sphere of influence, and you can't afford to play against my interests. I'm no longer content with just toppling the head of state. I colonize, and that's that. I've arrested Nicolas Maduro and his wife. They're my hostages. Excuse me, my prisoners.
But she really doesn't have a choice. We're going to have this done right.
Les Européens sont vraiment dans une forme de pusillanimité qui est extrêmement inquiétante, parce que ça signifie au fond que nous allons justifier, légitimer ces violations du droit international. Et si nous, les démocraties, qui avons porté tout ce que j'ai évoqué, car le droit international a été très largement porté et créé par les démocraties, si les démocraties elles-mêmes se résignent comme elles le font, renoncent, c'est ça le terme, je crois, c'est du renoncement, ça ouvre des perspectives extrêmement sombres.
Pourquoi cet abaissement devant l'Empire? Pourquoi cette servilité européenne qui, une nouvelle fois, s'est manifestée par la bouche de la commissaire européenne aux affaires étrangères?
What's impressive and most worrying is the deafening silence of the major traditional nations, ayatollahs or high priestesses of democracy and international law. I dare not say their cowardice or their cravenness. In truth, only a few major nations have condemned this abduction in a more or less sincere way.
Je veux dire, quand je dis on revient à Hobbes, c'est-à-dire au XVIe siècle, c'est-à-dire à l'époque où il n'y avait pas de règles, où en fait la guerre c'était on impose sa volonté et sans aucune espèce de mesure ni de limite.
Mais qui va dire stop sur cette planète quand on accepte un génocide, quand on accepte l'invasion de l'Ukraine, quand on accepte toutes ces choses? Qui, sinon nous, le peuple? Parce qu'il ne reste plus que cela, hélas.
Non, c'est comme un acte d'essai, c'est la concrétisation que vraiment plus personne ne respecte ces règles.
Nous entrons dans un moment de grand danger dès lors que chacun se sent autorisé à n'en faire qu'à sa tête et d'après les moyens dont il dispose.
Certainly, it's the end of international law. All these deals struck in the aftermath of the Second World War are shattered. How sad for international law students who see everything they were learning, which for them, even if far from perfect, was the guarantee of order and justice in the world, becoming obsolete. The President of the United States doesn't intend to stop there. No, his project, his ambition for the USA is much greater, much more revolutionary. All of America must be his sphere of influence. And the presidents who don't find favor in his eyes must be arrested with the same charge: drug trafficking.
Manufacture of drugs, meaning cocaine in particular, fairly hostile to the United States. I haven't given him a lot of thought. He's going to have himself some big problems if he doesn't wise up.
Did you take standpoint? So, yeah, look, I lived in heavy concerned, at least a little bit.
Les États-Unis, profitant de leur élan, ivres de mots pour M. Trump, dorénavant menacent aussi le Mexique, dans un passé récent, à qui il avait volé la moitié de son territoire déjà. Il menace la Colombie, où il a déjà 9 bases militaires. Quoi de plus? Y a-t-il donc un maître sur cette partie du monde? Oui, c'est ce qu'a dit M. Trump dans ses dernières déclarations sur la nouvelle doctrine de sécurité nationale qu'il a affirmée. Les Amériques sont sa propriété au sud comme au nord. Et l'Europe, annexée au prétendu monde occidental, de même.
We have a very sick neighbor. Colombia is very sick too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
So there will be an operation by the U.S.
It sounds good to me. Yeah. Well, Cuba always survived because of Venezuela. Now they won't have that money coming in. They won't have the income coming in. But a lot of Cubans were killed yesterday trying to protect him.
So, we know who's next on Donald Trump's shopping list. Still no one has anything to say? Would these be good invasions unlike the one in Ukraine? The strategy of the man many have until now seen as a buffoon is clear. He must have control over the entire American continent. It's his sphere of influence.
The Monroe Doctrine.
What exactly was the Monroe Doctrine? The Monroe Doctrine is a U.S. foreign policy proclaimed in 1823 by President Monroe, laying the groundwork for American influence across the Americas. The principle is simple. Europe must no longer intervene in the affairs of the Americas, and in exchange, the United States does not interfere in European affairs. An ideology summarized by the famous phrase, America for the Americans. This time, President Donald Trump embraces it and makes it his own.
And the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot. They now call it the Donroe Document. I don't know.
From now on, it's clearly established. The American continent is becoming his sphere of influence, and recalcitrant presidents will be arrested, imprisoned, and replaced by more compliant ones.
Ce qui se joue, et c'est en cela que ça nous concerne, nous Français et Européens, c'est un changement complet de l'ordre international. Et le mépris du droit, l'illimitisme des empires va nous conduire à des situations où Emmanuel Macron, les Européens, tous les dirigeants français seront devant une situation qui les concernera de beaucoup plus près.
This operation by Donald Trump also allows him to sign the death certificate of what constituted the strength of European nations, NATO. The armed wing of Western nations on which the European Union in particular bases its strength and its arrogance. A NATO that Trump doesn't care about and of which he remains the main financier.
Let's talk about Greenland in 20 days. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic.
Things have been clearly stated.
Il ne peut pas y avoir un bout de terre européen qui irait de la sorte basculer par la force au mépris à nouveau du droit dans le camp américain.
Never mind the protests from Europeans, from NATO members who see in this initiative a real breach of international rules. He wants Greenland and he'll have it. Europeans, including those who had welcomed or were indifferent to the coup in Venezuela, are suddenly rising up, denouncing this new decision, but always very timidly.
L'Europe décide que le Groenland, c'est le Groenland et ils sont pleinement solidaires du Danemark. Fort bien. Contre qui? Ah, c'est pas marqué. Le Groenland est menacé par les ours blancs, les Martiens, on ne sait pas qui, peut-être même par Poutine, qui sait, à moins que ce soit par LFI. Je vous livre la dernière déclaration de M. Trump. C'est presque aussi clair que du Macron. Nous nous occuperons du Groenland environ dans 2 mois. Alors, rendez-vous est fixé. Parlons du Groenland dans 20 jours. 2 mois, ça fait 60 jours, pas 20 jours. Peut-être une erreur de calcul mental. En tout cas, il l'a dit.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not.
Le Groenland, il y a quelques jours seulement, il y a un émissaire spécial nommé par Trump, qui est le gouverneur de Louisiane, qui va donc être en charge du dossier Groenland, et il a déclaré il y a quelques jours, mon travail, c'est de réfléchir à un moyen d'annexer le Groenland pour les intérêts supérieurs des États-Unis.
Il dit, je veux tout du Groenland jusqu'au sud de l'Amérique latine. Oui. Pourquoi est-ce qu'il veut ça? Parce que son objectif stratégique, c'est la Chine. Et donc, il veut contrôler ce continent-là pour les ressources, pour se sentir tranquille, pour cette domination-là.
Contrairement à ce que tout le monde raconte, le Groenland n'est pas partie de l'Union européenne. Ça n'est pas vrai. Le Groenland a choisi par 2 fois de ne pas être dans l'Union européenne. 2 fois. Le Groenland est soumis à un traité, je l'ai ramené, 1951.
Vous l'avez sous les yeux, vous l'avez même imprimé.
Il est là, voilà, je l'ai imprimé parce que ça sert toujours, qui donne aux États-Unis la possibilité de mettre n'importe où, n'importe quand et n'importe comment au Groenland des équipements militaires de défense dans l'intérêt des États-Unis.
Donc pas dans l'intérêt des habitants du Groenland, pas dans l'intérêt des membres de l'OTAN ou de l'Union européenne.
Dans le cadre de l'OTAN, mais dans l'intérêt des États-Unis. Ceci date de 1941, 10 ans avant, quand l'ambassadeur du Groenland, contre l'avis de son propre gouvernement danois, a donné tout pouvoir aux États-Unis pour se prémunir d'attaques de sous-marins allemands. Depuis 1951, c'est une immense base, d'abord aérospatiale, de contrôle aérien, du NORAD, donc qui contrôle tout le continent nord-américain, États-Unis, Canada et Groenland, et surtout qui a été une base de bombardiers stratégiques contre la Russie pendant des années. Cette base était secrète. C'est un Français, Jean Mallory, qui la découvre en se baladant avec son guide inuit et qui, 4 ans plus tard, dit, vous savez qu'il y a une grande base américaine dont personne ne connaît l'existence.
Cette base aérienne, ce traité que vous avez sous les yeux, ils sont toujours aujourd'hui
en 2004, ils ont été
en application.
Oui, ils ont été remis à jour, mais pas du tout supprimés.
Agility of the European Union. A cardboard giant whose aura, whose power, whose notoriety relied essentially on Uncle Tom. A bit like the little rascal who pestered everyone in the playground because his brother, the big guy with the easy punch, watched over him. Some in the African press speak of Washington's lapdog. Donald Trump doesn't miss an opportunity to weaken it, humiliate it, show how useless it is and how powerful he is.
Emmanuel. You know Emmanuel Macron? I love the French accent. Emmanuel. They said, listen, you're going to have to raise your prices a little bit because we're paying 14 times more than you. Emmanuel goes, no. We will not do that. Yes, you will, Emmanuel, 100%. The answer is no. We're not going to double our drug prices. Not for you or anybody else. I said, yes, you are, 100%. We are not going to do it. No, you don't understand. 100%. You're going to do it and you're going to like it. I said, okay, here's the story, Emmanuel. If on Monday you haven't agreed to every single thing that we want, I'm putting a 25% tariff on everything coming out of France, including your wines, your champagnes, and everything else. Emmanuel said to me, Donald, you have a deal. I would love to increase my prescription drug prices by 200% or whatever. I would love to do it. It'd be such an honor. Whatever you want, Donald, please. Don't tell the population. Please, Donald, I beg you. Every country said the same thing. No, we will not do this. Some were strong, some were very nice, some were rude. But they all said one thing, no, we won't. And within, I'd say on average, 3.2 minutes, they were all saying, we would be honored to quadruple our drug prices.
Africans are discovering with amazement, and for most with jubilation, the weakness of those who posed as undisputed masters. As the Cameroonians say, everyone has their inferior. Ivorians say everyone has their fool. We are their inferiors, to whom they say all sorts of mean things and upon whom they've inflicted every humiliation for centuries.
Les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin, midi et soir.
And now we discover that the king is actually naked. He too is in our position, having rules dictated to him with threats of sanctions and reprisals. Every time they talk back a little.
Competition from the United States of America through trade agreements that undermine our export interests, demand maximum concessions, and openly aim to weaken and subordinate Europe, combined with an endless accumulation of new tariffs that are fundamentally unacceptable, even more so when they are used as leverage against territorial sovereignty.
It's been said, Donald Trump is threatening European sovereignty. There's no challenging his plans. President Macron has been paying the price for a year now. He refuses to join the peace council imposed by Washington, the likely successor to the Security Council he plans to create. Bam! Bringing out the heavy artillery.
Nobody wants him because he's going to be out of office very soon. So, that's all right. What I'll do is if they feel like Costco, I'll put a 200% tariff on his wines and champagnes, and he'll join. But he doesn't have to join.
Que Donald Trump devient sans filtre, que depuis le coup du Venezuela, le coup de force au Venezuela, depuis ce qu'il a fait à la négociation qu'il a eue avec les Iraniens, il se sent super puissant. Il n'a plus de filtre.
Avec Donald Trump, depuis quelques mois, on est passé à un autre monde. Un monde qui n'est plus celui du droit, du respect, de la compréhension mutuelle, de la convergence. Non, un monde de la menace, de l'action de force et un monde aussi de chantage. Là, il va encore plus loin puisqu'il veut mettre en place un conseil de la paix à la place de l'ONU, dont il serait lui-même dans ce conseil de la paix le président, peut-être même à vie, et les pays qui ne voudraient pas venir seraient sanctionnés.
Le digital américain possède l'Europe. Totalement, le cloud, le software, etc. Quand vous faites la somme totale de ce qui revient aux États-Unis, quand vous prenez une chambre d'hôtel avec Bookings, un taxi avec Uber, une chambre avec Airbnb, sans parler du cloud, sans parler d'Oracle pour votre software ou de Microsoft, le total, ça fait 120 milliards d'euros qui partent aux États-Unis tous les ans. Et c'est beaucoup plus important stratégiquement pour les États-Unis que de savoir s'ils vont nous vendre des voitures que d'ailleurs ils ne nous vendront jamais.
The truth is cruel, isn't it? Is this how we're talking down to Europe, and it has no way to react?
Il faut avoir avec les États-Unis d'Amérique sous cette administration une relation qui soit fondée sur le rapport de force. Ils nous imposent des droits de douane, ils auront des droits de douane. Ils nous imposent une coercition, ils auront des dispositions anti-coercition. Ils veulent ne plus rester dans l'Alliance Atlantique, nous verrons bien. Nous devrons le faire ensemble avec les Européens. Il ne s'agit pas de rentrer dans une escalade, il s'agit tout simplement de se faire respecter.
The European Union should hit him in the face and push back very aggressively. Fight fire with fire. Trump is weak. He's weakness masquerading as strength. Yes, he's weakness masquerading as strength. He's good at exploiting weaknesses, but he backs down when he's punched in the face. So it requires conviction, it requires backbone, not capitulation. And I just hope Europeans understand that.
Les Occidentaux reculeront devant Trump, plus celui-ci verra son appétit aiguisé et continuera à vouloir menacer l'ensemble des autres nations.
Ça fait 1 an que Donald Trump a entièrement la main sur le récit international, heure par heure, depuis 1 an. Il est temps que les Européens montrent qu'il y a un autre récit possible.
Note that, thanks to this upheaval of alliances, everyone recognizes the weight that a narrative can have, something that was contested for decades. In short, everything we've been witnessing for a year now, since the advent of Donald Trump II, shows the fragility of the system that emerged from the Second World War, which was said to be solid and with strong balances, where in the end, the absolute power of an unconventional and determined man was enough for the whole system to glitch. Today, no one can stop the escalation that Donald Trump has entered into. Even in his own country, in the United States, constitutional texts no longer resist his determination. Congress is being sidelined, and individual liberties of which Americans were so proud are suffering greatly.
Our rights are disappearing, as I wrote on my sign. Freedom of speech is disappearing. The separation of powers is disappearing. Freedom of the press. These are all the things that make America great.
People are being torn from their homes, from their jobs. I never thought I'd see the day when we would become one of those police states.
On the other side, there's no one left. The opposition is inaudible. With him, international law is definitively dead. The great principles of justice, the International Court of Justice, international cooperation, it's all over. He has, moreover, withdrawn from many United Nations bodies for which he has the utmost contempt.
Je veux dire, quand je dis on revient à Hobbes, c'est-à-dire au XVIe siècle, c'est-à-dire à l'époque où il n'y avait pas de règles, où en fait la guerre c'était on impose sa volonté et sans aucune espèce de mesure ni de limite.
Everyone can do what they want, as long as they don't go against the interests of the United States. Even if the international system and the rules of international law were not favorable to Africa, we Africans must not rejoice in this dismantling. Africa has reason to be worried, in truth, especially when we know the division that reigns on the continent. The consequences of these upheavals, of this return to the state of nature, to the jungle, are cause for concern. There's really nothing to rejoice about, as my brilliant and very promising colleague Livingston Amant illustrates with talent in his column on Afromedia. An online column that I warmly recommend to you. Because for the tenant of the White House, Africa is this.
We had a meeting, and I said, why is it we only take people from shithole countries, right? Why can't we have some people from Norway, Sweden, just a few? Let us have a few. From Denmark, do you mind sending us a few people? Send us some nice people, do you mind? But we always take people from Somalia, places that are a disaster, right? Filthy, dirty, disgusting, ridden with crime. The only thing they're good at is going after ships.
We are the place in our journey where we do not have the luxury of forgetting. When government officials can so easily use the words like garbage and filth to describe our kith and kin, when they can refer to our countries as shitholes, when they can indiscriminately strip people who look like us of citizenship that they have earned, we do not have the luxury of forgetting or of either excusing the racist dog whistles or explaining the overtly discriminatory and divisive statements that are made daily to our hearing.
The number of Africans deported from the USA back to the continent this past year is simply unprecedented. But that's not all. Donald Trump is already in Africa. He's issued a fierce and serious warning to Nigeria, a major oil producer, which has expressed its desire to join the BRICS. The matter began with a threat to strike Nigeria if the persecution of local Christians in that country does not stop. A curious argument, you'll agree, for those of you who know Nigeria. Over there, the barbarians who rape, loot, and kill, whom we've labeled jihadists but who are actually armed bandits hiding behind an Islam for which they have no respect, primarily target populations in areas with high Muslim concentrations. In fact, these terrorists often push their contempt so far as to go and kill inside mosques. Regardless, without warning or consulting the federal government, the USA struck on December 26, 2025, in Sokoto State in northwestern Nigeria. Curious, when we know that the stronghold of these jihadists is mainly concentrated in the northeast of the country. In this region, the biggest security problem is posed by local criminal gangs, known as bandits, rather than by jihadists. What was the real purpose of these strikes, for which the exact number of victims is still unknown? If the goal is truly to annihilate the jihadists, if that's really Washington's concern, why isn't it more energetic and concrete by striking in the Sahel, in the Malian, Nigerian, or Burkinabe deserts, where their bases are known and where they attack populations more violently? In truth, President Tinubu of Nigeria, who is struggling right now and has clearly understood the message sent by Donald Trump, tried to save face by finding justifications for these strikes. One must certainly not upset the warmonger in the White House. He welcomed this aid, but in private, he admits he was not informed. These strikes are a clear message to oil producers who are cozying up to the BRICS and selling oil to China. In 2024, total Nigerian exports to China reached just over $2 billion. Nigeria is not the only African country close to the BRICS to face the wrath of Donald Trump. Remember the equally incredible case of white genocide attributed to South Africa by the White House.
Now this is very bad. These are burial sites right here. Burial sites, over 1,000 of white farmers, and those cars are lined up to pay love on a Sunday morning. Each one of those white things you see is a cross, and there's approximately 1,000 of them. They're all white farmers, the family of white farmers. And those cars aren't driving, they're stopped there to pay respects to their family member who was killed. And it's a terrible sight. I've never seen anything like it. Both sides of the road, you have crosses.
A completely fabricated story using footage from an unrelated event, with the sole aim of placing South Africa under sanctions. Just because he thinks Africa is full of shithole countries doesn't mean Donald Trump isn't interested in the continent. Wrong. He's interested in it to the highest degree. Not the people, since he prefers Swedes, Finns and the like, but its immense wealth, especially the rare earths and minerals vital to his economy. Just look at how quickly his lieutenants arrived in the DRC to play the role of peacemakers. The pressure put on the authorities to sign the famous Washington agreements.
And they want us to go to batteries. Let's go to batteries. We don't have battery content. So let's go to batteries, according to these morons that were in our country. Let's not use oil and gas, which we have more than any country in the world. Let's go to batteries. Well, we have to go to the Congo and get it from China. But I actually stopped the war with Congo and Rwanda, and they said to me, please, please, we would love you to come and take our minerals, which we'll do.
One day we'll surely know the full extent of the minerals they've taken from the Congolese people, while promising a hypothetical peace that's still nowhere in sight because, in truth, nothing has changed in eastern DRC. After the photo ops in Washington, the people of Goma, Bukavu, and Uvira, in short, the entire eastern DRC is still waiting for the end of the war. No strikes, no military operations are being planned to put an end to their suffering. But in truth, is it Donald Trump's role to worry about these distant lands? His mission is to make America great again. And more than ever, Africa should be worried if it doesn't want to be recolonized with even more violence and inhumanity. This operation in Venezuela might inspire other major nations that have felt some hesitation or embarrassment about directly occupying territories they're interested in. It's a dangerous precedent that could inspire those who dream of empire.
Je suis persuadé que dans quelques années, je ne sais pas si c'est 10 ans ou moins ou plus, nous aurons l'obligation de retourner aider ces pays africains. Je pense que cet intérêt commun-là devrait un jour faire que l'Europe se décidera à agir comme une entité politique qui ira défendre elle-même ses intérêts, y compris par le moyen de l'engagement de ses armées.
What could thwart this plan today? Certainly not international law, which died with Venezuela, and soon Greenland. And Africa is so much more fragile with its divisions and the lack of vision of its leaders, who unfortunately continue to isolate themselves in tiny states when their survival depends on unity. Any Western power could take over a country of interest and its wealth in just a few days. But it's certain that if Africa is united, it cannot be taken. President Tinubu of Nigeria, who was strongly opposed to the AES countries and even suggested bombing Niger, must understand from these recent events that he carries little weight on the global stage and that his interest lies in unity and forming regional alliances. His legitimate ambition to join BRICS would be less fragile if they embarked on this path with 10 or 15 other African countries. Washington would have a harder time hitting them all. This doesn't just apply to Westerners. The Chinese, Indians, and Russians are also our predators. They may be more insidious, but they are no less voracious. And the end goal is the same. And they won't be the ones deploying missiles or tomahawks to defend our sovereignty in case of an attack. Despite their differences, the interests they have with other powers are often greater than those they share with us. With the end of international law, the moment is particularly critical. The accelerating global geopolitical shifts show once again that Africa risks being the biggest absentee and could once again be swallowed up by the strongest and the boldest. It risks, for the umpteenth time, being the stage for the clash of others' interests. We cannot blame others for coming to seek out our wealth. It's only natural they come. It's been the rule of the game since the dawn of time. It's up to us to defend our interests, to negotiate as equals with them by looking to the future and planning ahead, by making legitimate demands and thinking of the generations to come. It's time our leaders move past petty squabbles and daily survival concerns and stop their pissing contest to focus on the future. The main concern is how to defend ourselves and protect our interests against the predators watching us with such envy and appetite, how to arm our youth with knowledge and science to face this oncoming wave. A wave so prepared and seasoned that now over there they are designing children enhanced by artificial intelligence. Children programmed at birth to perform specific tasks and face the world of tomorrow. Almost war machines that our children, left to their own devices, will face, as seen in Ariel Kitsio's column on all our Afro media platforms. A perspective that seems surreal because it is so advanced and so bold. Perhaps it's time to organize and give our youth a real chance. Thank you for your kind attention and your loyalty to Afro Media, which wishes you an excellent year 2026. Tens of millions of you are watching us, and several million have subscribed to our various platforms. Thank you again, and happy year 2026. A year starting with Senegal's brilliant victory at the Africa Cup in Morocco, which should inspire us with dignity, pride, and perseverance. The Lions of Teranga, facing adversity, violence, hatred, and cheating, showed such greatness and such dignity that I must congratulate their journey and attitude, which seemed to displease Gianni Infantino, the FIFA president, who couldn't even hide his bias in the stands. He wasn't the only one in that hostile stadium, ignoring the fair play that should govern this environment. And to think the Pope of football is condemning the Senegalese victims. Not surprising, given the fate that the man who invented a peace prize tailored for President Donald Trump reserves for African football, which he has placed under guardianship, and only wants to show the world once every 4 years to make room for European championships. We were talking about the recolonization of the continent in this column. It is already underway in football. And if we aren't careful, we'll forever remain suppliers of muscle for other championships. A subject we'll be discussing very soon on our Afro Media platforms and channels. A proverb from my home in Cameroon says it's because the sweet potato agreed to be eaten raw that it isn't respected. The macabre refused, and anyone who tries to eat it raw doesn't come out unscathed. That's for sure, something to ponder. This is the essence of our commitment. But to encourage us, to give us a bit more strength, a bit more courage and drive, don't forget to subscribe to our channel by scanning the QR code on screen and by downloading our app for free, AFO Media on iOS or Google Play. We would also be very grateful for your donations on our app to support our fight, yours, that of an opinion channel, that of AFO Media, which offers you the African narrative without compromise but without condescension.